The whispers started before I even made it through the church doors. I could feel their eyes on my back, judging my simple navy dress that I'd spent 3 months savings on. My name is Scarlett, and today I'm watching my eldest son marry into a family that thinks I'm not good enough to breathe the same air as them. Did you see what his mother is wearing? The stage whisper carried from somewhere behind me. I heard she works as a housekeeper. I straightened my spine and kept walking, the way I've done for the past 28 years since losing my husband. The church pews were filling up quickly, designer dresses on one side, modest Sunday best on the other. A perfect visual representation of the divide between the Grants and us common folk. Mom. Milton appeared at my elbow, my younger son's face tight with concern. You okay? I can still cause a scene and get us out of here. I squeezed his hand. I'm fine, honey. This is Hugo's day. But was it really? I watched my eldest son standing at the altar, shifting nervously in his expensive new suit, a gift from his future in-laws. The Hugo I raised would have been comfortable in his own clothes, but Lauren had made it clear from day one that he needed to elevate himself. Mrs. Gomez, Lauren's mother Josephine swooped in, air-kissing near my cheek. So glad you could make it. We weren't sure if you'd be able to get the day off work. I wouldn't miss my son's wedding, I replied, keeping my voice steady, though I'm surprised you found time in your busy social schedule. Josephine's plastic smile flickered. Before she could respond, the wedding march began. Everyone stood, turning to watch Lauren float down the aisle in a dress that probably cost more than my annual salary. She was beautiful, I'll give her that, but beauty only runs skin deep. During the ceremony, I kept my eyes fixed on Hugo's face, searching for signs of the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, the boy who helped me clean houses on weekends so we could afford his college textbooks. Now he was promising his life to a woman who'd never worked a day in hers. If anyone objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace. My hand twitched in my lap. Milton grabbed it, squeezing hard. We both knew what was at stake, what I was holding on to. The reception was worse. I was seated at a table far from the main party, surrounded by distant relatives who looked as uncomfortable as I felt. Lauren's voice carried across the room as she held court with her bridesmaids. Can you believe his mother? That dress looks like it came from a thrift store. Laughter followed. I told Hugo we need to distance ourselves after the wedding. I mean, what will people think? They'll think you married a man who loves his mother, I said clearly, standing up. The conversations around us died. Lauren's face went from smug to shocked as she realized I was right behind her. Oh, Mrs. Gomez, I was just making sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Don't worry, sweetheart. They'll know soon enough. I walked away, leaving silence in my wake. Jillian, my best friend since childhood, caught up with me at the bar. You're not going to let them get away with this, are you? She whispered, ordering us both a glass of wine. I watched Forrest Grant, Lauren's father, deep in conversation with Hugo. The way he kept glancing in my direction told me everything I needed to know about their topic of discussion. No, I said, taking a sip of wine. I've spent years being the bigger person, Jillian. Years of sacrifice and hard work, raising my boys alone, and now they think they can just walk in and erase me? What are you going to do? I touched the small envelope in my purse, the one containing documents that would change everything. I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve, just not in the way they expect. Milton appeared beside us, his face flushed with anger. Mom, you won't believe what I just overheard Lauren's parents saying. They're planning to. I know, honey. I patted his arm. But don't worry, your father left us more than just memories. He left us a way to make sure justice gets served. I watched Lauren and her parents laughing with their wealthy friends, probably already planning how to remake Hugo in their image. They had no idea what was coming. Sometimes revenge isn't about getting even, it's about revealing the truth. And I had 28 years worth of truth ready to spill. The morning after the wedding, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the inheritance papers while Milton paced behind me. The coffee had gone cold, but I barely noticed. I still can't believe what they said about you, Mom, Milton muttered, running his hands through his hair. Did you see how they seated you? Like you were some distant relative instead of the groom's mother. Sit down, honey. There's something I need to show you. I pulled out the yellowed envelope I'd kept hidden for nearly 3 decades. Your father was smarter than anyone gave him credit for. Milton's eyes widened as I spread the documents across the table. Is that everything? I nodded. The house, the land downtown, the trust fund. It's all in my name. Your father knew the grants would come sniffing around eventually. He'd had dealings with Forrest before. But Hugo said Lauren's dad was helping him invest in some property downtown. I laughed without humor. The same property your father left to us. Forrest's been trying to get his hands on that land for years. Now he thinks marrying his daughter to Hugo will give him access. The doorbell rang, interrupting us. Through the window, I saw Jillian holding up a bottle of wine and takeout bags. Just what we needed. I brought reinforcements, she announced, sweeping in. And you won't believe what I overheard at the salon this morning. Josephine was there, bragging about how they're going to help Hugo manage his inheritance. What inheritance? Milton snorted. They think we're broke. Let them think that for now, I said, pouring wine into coffee mugs. We'd never been fancy enough for proper wine glasses. Your father made me promise to wait until the right moment. Jillian picked up one of the documents. Holy Scarlet, this is worth millions now. That downtown lot alone is exactly what Forrest wants to develop into luxury condos. I finished. He's been buying up everything around it. Our lot is the missing piece he needs. The front door opened again, and Hugo walked in. He looked exhausted, his new suit wrinkled from the night before. Mom? He stopped short, taking in the papers on the table. What's all this? Sit down, son. I pulled out a chair. There's something you need to know about your new in-laws. Lauren's parents are taking us to dinner tonight, he said, avoiding my eyes. They want to discuss some business opportunities. I bet they do. Milton couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. Did they mention how they treated Mom at the wedding? They're just different from us, Hugo defended weakly. Lauren says we need to adapt to their world. Their world? I stood up, my voice sharp. The world where they mock your mother? Where they pretend 28 years of sacrifice means nothing? Mom, please. No, you need to hear this. I handed him the property deed. Your father knew people like Forrest. That's why he left everything in my name. He knew they'd try to take advantage. Hugo's face paled as he read. This can't be right. The land downtown, Lauren's dad said it was worthless. Worth about $15 million now, Jillian chimed in. And that's just the land value. They're using you, honey. I touched his hand. Just like they used your father all those years ago. The only difference is, this time we're ready for them. Hugo's phone buzzed, Lauren's face lighting up the screen. He stared at it, then declined the call. What are you going to do? He asked quietly. First, I'm going to that dinner tonight. I gathered the papers, returning them to their envelope. And then I'm going to show them exactly who they're dealing with. I'm coming with you, Milton declared. No, I shook my head. I need you to take these papers to my lawyer. Hugo, you go to dinner with Lauren like nothing's wrong. Let her parents think their plan is working. Scarlett, Jillian warned, be careful. People like the Grants. They're not used to losing. I thought about all the nights I'd worked multiple jobs to put food on the table, the birthdays I'd missed because I was cleaning other people's houses, the way Lauren's mother looked at me like I was something stuck to her shoe. Neither am I said, finishing my wine. They think money makes them untouchable, but they're about to learn that a mother's love is worth more than any trust fund. Hugo stood up, his face set in determination I hadn't seen since he was a boy. I need to know everything, Mom, everything Dad told you about Forrest. Then sit back down, I said, pulling out another envelope, because this story starts long before you met Lauren. The truth was about to come out, and the Grants had no idea what they'd started by underestimating me. The restaurant Forrest chose screamed old money, with crystal chandeliers and waiters who looked more expensive than my car. I smoothed down my dress, the same one from the wedding, and walked in with my head high. "Mrs. Gomez," the hostess said, her tone shifting from welcoming to barely civil when she saw me. "The Grant party is already seated." I spotted them at a corner table, Lauren draped in another designer outfit, Hugo looking uncomfortable in his new suit. Forrest stood as I approached, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Scarlett, we weren't sure you'd join us." He gestured to an empty chair, the one furthest from Hugo. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, taking the seat next to my son instead. Lauren's face tightened. "Mother," she hissed at Josephine, "I thought you said wine?" Josephine cut her off, signaling a waiter. "We've ordered a lovely bottle of Chateau something or other." "Just water for me," I smiled. I like to keep my head clear for business discussions. The temperature at the table seemed to drop 10 degrees. Forrest set down his menu slowly. "Business discussions? Isn't that why we're here?" I pulled out my phone, checking the time. My lawyer should be finishing up with those papers Milton brought him. Hugo coughed into his napkin, hiding a smile. Lauren's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. "Papers?" Josephine's voice rose slightly. "What papers?" "Oh, you know," I waved dismissively. "Just some property documents. That downtown lot you've been discussing with Hugo." Forrest's face reddened. That worthless piece of land? I was merely trying to help Hugo understand real estate. "Worthless?" I laughed. "Is that why you've spent the last 5 years buying up everything around it? Why you pushed this wedding forward right when the city approved the new development plans?" "Mom," Lauren whined, "what are you talking about? Daddy's just trying to help Hugo succeed." "Like he helped my husband succeed?" The words came out sharp as knives. "Should I tell them about that, Forrest? About how you convinced Robert to sell his shares right before the company value tripled?" Forrest's knuckles went white around his fork. "Ancient history. Business is business." "Yes, it is." I pulled out a single document from my purse, "which is why I found it interesting that you've already started paperwork to transfer ownership of my property into your company's name, using Hugo's marriage as leverage." Lauren gasped. Hugo turned to her, his expression hardening. "Did you know about this?" Daddy said it was just business." She grabbed his arm. "It doesn't change anything between us." "Actually," I slid the paper across the table, "it changes everything. This is a cease and desist letter from my lawyer. Touch my property again, and we'll see you in court." Josephine stood up so quickly, her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Several diners turned to look. "How dare you?" she hissed. "After we welcomed you into our family." "Welcomed?" I stayed seated, keeping my voice calm. "Is that what you call mocking me at my son's wedding? Seating me with the caterers? Planning to steal my property?" "We can work something out," Forrest said quickly, his businessman mask slipping back on. "A partnership, perhaps? Split the profits." "Like you split profits with Robert?" I stood now, gathering my purse. My husband trusted you once, Forrest. That trust cost him everything. I won't make the same mistake. Hugo, Lauren pleaded, tell her to stop. We love each other. Hugo looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time. Do we? Or do you love what your father thought he could get from me? This isn't over, Forrest growled, but I could see the fear behind his anger. You're right, I agreed. It's not. The press conference is tomorrow. I think people will be very interested in hearing about how the great Forrest Grant tries to swindle widows and manipulate marriages for profit. You wouldn't dare? Try me. I turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Lauren, that dress you're wearing? I cleaned houses for 3 years to buy Hugo his first suit. He wore it to his father's funeral. But you're right. What would people think of that? I walked out of the restaurant with my head high, Hugo right behind me. Outside, he grabbed my arm. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have seen. It's not your fault. I hugged him tight. Love makes us blind sometimes. But now you see. My phone buzzed, a text from Milton. Papers filed. Lawyer says they can't touch us. What now? Hugo asked as we walked to my car. Now? I smiled. Now we show them what real family loyalty looks like, and maybe teach them that money isn't everything. The game wasn't over, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally playing with a full deck. The press conference room at the downtown Marriott buzzed with anticipation. Local reporters filled every seat, their cameras trained on the empty podium. Milton stood by the door checking his phone. Lawrence called 6 times in the last hour, he whispered as I adjusted my blazer. Another loan from Jillian. Her father's lawyer, too. Let them call. I glanced at my watch. Is Hugo ready? In position, Jillian's got the PowerPoint queued up. The room hushed as I approached the podium. Camera flashes burst like lightning, and I gripped the edges of the lectern to steady myself. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice stronger than I felt. 28 years ago, my husband Robert made a decision that cost him everything. Today, I'm here to ensure history doesn't repeat itself. The door burst open. Forrest strode in, Josephine and Lauren trailing behind him like designer-clad ducklings. Their lawyer scurried after them, briefcase clutched to his chest. This is slander, Forrest shouted. We'll sue. Please take a seat. I gestured to the empty chairs in the front row. You'll want to see this. The first slide appeared behind me, documents showing Forrest's failed attempts to transfer my property using Hugo's marriage certificate. 3 days ago, this man tried to steal my family's property through manipulating my son's marriage to his daughter. Cameras swiveled to capture Forrest's reddening face. But that's not where this story begins. Next slide, newspaper clippings from 28 years ago. In 1995, Forrest convinced my husband to sell his shares in their joint venture for pennies on the dollar. A week later, the company's value tripled. I looked directly at Lauren. Your father built his empire on broken trust and stolen dreams. That's a lie. Josephine stood up. We have proof. Like these? Hugo emerged from the side door, carrying a stack of folders. He began distributing them to reporters. Bank records showing how my father's signature was forged on the final transfer documents. Lauren gasped. Hugo, what are you doing? Finding out who you really are. He didn't look at her as he passed. Who your family really is. The lawyer jumped up, waving papers. We have a cease and desist. Funny thing about those, Milton called from the back. They only work if you have legal standing, which you lost when we found the original property deeds. He held up his phone. Just got confirmation from the DA's office. They're very interested in these forgery allegations. Cameras clicked frantically as Forrest's face went from red to white. Josephine grabbed Lauren's arm, pulling her toward the door, but reporters blocked their path. Mrs. Gomez, a journalist called out, "What do you want?" "Justice." I straightened my shoulders, and to show that money doesn't make you untouchable. My husband died believing he'd failed his family, but he left us something more valuable than wealth. He left us the truth. "This is ridiculous," Lauren shrieked. "Hugo, tell them. Tell them we love each other." Hugo walked to the podium, standing beside me. "Do we? Or was I just your father's ticket to my mother's property?" The next slide showed Lauren's text messages to her father. "He's totally clueless, Daddy. Just get him to sign the papers after the wedding." The room erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and Lauren burst into tears, real ones this time, not the delicate drops she'd perfected for social occasions. "You've ruined everything," she screamed at me. "No, honey." I shook my head. "You did that all by yourself." Forrest lunged for the podium, but security guards appeared from nowhere, restraining him. His lawyer was already on the phone, sweat beading on his forehead. "This isn't over," Forrest threatened as they led him away. "Actually, it is." I held up my phone. "The DA just approved the warrant. They're searching your offices as we speak." The reporters surged forward, questions overlapping. "Mrs. Gomez, will you press charges?" "Hugo, what about the marriage?" "Ms. Grant, any comment on the forgery allegations?" I stepped back, letting Hugo take the microphone. "My mother taught me that real wealth isn't in bank accounts," he said clearly. "It's in how you treat people, and I've seen enough to know which side I'm choosing." Lauren fled the room, mascara streaming down her face. Josephine hurried after her, leaving her designer purse behind in her haste. As the reporters dispersed, Jillian appeared at my side. "That was better than any revenge movie I've ever seen." "It's not about revenge," I said, watching Hugo hug Milton. "It's about truth and family." "Speaking of family," Milton grinned, "guess who just called? Dad's old business partner. Says he has some stories about Forrest that the DA might find interesting." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Then I guess this isn't over quite yet." The truth was finally out, and it felt better than any revenge I could have planned. The morning after the press conference, my small kitchen could barely contain the energy buzzing through it. Hugo sat at the table, papers spread everywhere, while Milton and Jillian huddled over a laptop. "Another email from Lauren," Milton announced, scrolling through his phone. "This one's just crying emojis and exclamation points. Her father's been arrested." Jillian looked up from the laptop. "It's all over the news. The DA found more than just forged documents in those offices." The doorbell rang. Hugo tensed, but I waved him down. "It's probably just another reporter." Instead, I opened the door to find Josephine, her perfect makeup unable to hide her red-rimmed eyes. "Please," she said quietly. "5 minutes." I hesitated, then stepped aside. The kitchen fell silent as she walked in, her designer heels clicking against my worn linoleum floor. "Well," she said, taking in the scene, "I suppose this is what winning looks like." "This isn't about winning," I replied. "This is about justice." "Justice?" She laughed bitterly. "My husband's in jail. My daughter's marriage is over. Our reputation is ruined." "Mom," Hugo started, but I held up my hand. "Your husband ruined his own life," I said firmly, "just like he tried to ruin my husband's. The only difference is, this time there was evidence." Josephine sank into a kitchen chair, looking oddly small without her usual armor of designer clothes and superiority. "We're not all bad people," she whispered. "Lauren really did love Hugo." "No," Milton cut in, holding up his phone. "She loved what he represented. Look at these texts between her and her friends. Just have to play the loving wife until Daddy gets the property. That's not love." Josephine's face crumpled. "I taught her that, to always look for advantage, to use people as stepping stones. I thought, I thought that's what strong women did. Strong women? I pulled out a chair across from her. Let me tell you about strong women. Strong women work 3 jobs to put their kids through college. They skip meals so their children can eat. They don't step on others to climb higher. The police found evidence of other frauds, Jillian added gently. Other families' forests destroyed. Did you know about those too? Josephine shook her head, tears falling freely now. I never asked. It was easier not to know. Hugo stood up suddenly. I need to see Lauren one last time. She's at the plaza, Josephine said. Room 542. She won't leave the room. As Hugo grabbed his keys, Milton called after him. Want me to come? No, Hugo replied. This is something I need to do alone. After he left, Josephine pulled out a thick envelope. I found these in Forrest's study last night. Letters from Robert, your husband. He wrote to Forrest for years, begging him to tell the truth. My hands shook as I took the envelope. He never told me he wrote letters. There's more, she continued. Bank statements showing where the money went. Names of other victims. I'm giving it all to the DA. Why? Milton asked suspiciously. Because, she stood up, straightening her shoulders. Maybe it's time I learned what real strength looks like. The door opened again and Hugo walked back in, his face pale. That was quick, I said. She wasn't alone. His voice was tight. She was with her ex-boyfriend, planning their escape to Europe, using money from my accounts. Josephine covered her face with her hands. Oh, Lauren. I recorded everything, Hugo said. Already sent it to the DA. They're heading there now. My phone buzzed, a news alert showing Forrest being led out of the police station in handcuffs. They're denying him bail, Jillian read over my shoulder. Too many charges, too much evidence of ongoing fraud. I should go. Josephine stood. Lauren will need someone, even if she doesn't deserve it. At the door, she turned back. Scarlett, I'm sorry for everything. You're twice the woman I'll ever be. After she left, Milton let out a long breath. Well, that was intense. It's not over, I said, looking at Robert's letters. These people, there are more victims out there, more families who deserve justice. What are you thinking, Mom? Hugo asked. I picked up one of the letters, my husband's familiar handwriting bringing tears to my eyes. I'm thinking it's time to finish what your father started. Time to make things right. Count me in, Jillian said immediately. Us too. Milton nodded at Hugo. Family sticks together, right? I looked around my small kitchen, at my real family, not bound by money or status, but by love and loyalty. The truth had cost us a lot, but it had given us something priceless in return. Our dignity. Then let's get to work, I said, reaching for the laptop. We have more stories to tell. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters as I walked up, flanked by Hugo and Milton. Behind us came a line of people, families we'd found through Robert's letters, all victims of Forrest's schemes. Mrs. Gomez! A reporter thrust a microphone toward me. Is it true more victims have come forward? 23 families, I replied, stopping at the top of the steps. 23 lives destroyed by one man's greed. Inside, the courtroom was already full. Lauren sat in the front row, wearing significantly less expensive clothes than the last time I'd seen her. She wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. All rise, the bailiff called out. Forrest was led in, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his usual tailored suit. He looked older, smaller somehow. His eyes locked with mine for a moment before darting away. Your Honor, the prosecutor began, we've uncovered evidence of systematic fraud spanning 3 decades. Mr. Grant didn't just steal money, he stole futures, dreams, entire legacies. One by one, people stood to tell their stories. A retired teacher who lost his pension, a a young widow whose insurance payout vanished, a family who lost their restaurant of 4 generations. When it was my turn, I walked to the witness stand with my head high. Robert wrote you letters for years, I said, looking directly at Forrest. He believed you were still his friend, that you had a conscience. Objection, Forrest's lawyer jumped up. Relevance? Overruled, the judge said. Continue, Mrs. Gomez. I found this in one of his letters. I held up a faded photograph. It's you and Robert at our wedding. He was your best man. How do you go from that to destroying someone's life? Forrest shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, I saw shame in his eyes. The prosecution would like to enter new evidence, the DA announced. Emails between the defendant and his daughter, planning to use her marriage to fraudulently obtain Mrs. Gomez's property. Lauren burst into tears. Josephine, sitting several rows back, didn't move to comfort her. Your Honor, Forrest's lawyer stood. My client would like to address the court. Forrest shuffled to the podium, his handcuffs clinking. I got lost, he said, his voice rough. Each deal got bigger, each lie easier. Robert trusted me, and I betrayed that trust. All these people trusted me. Save your performance, Milton called out. We've seen enough acting from your family. Order, the judge warned, but I saw her hide a small smile. The DA stood again. Given the extensive nature of these crimes and the new evidence, we're seeking the maximum sentence on all counts. No, Lauren jumped up. Daddy, tell them about the money, the accounts in Switzerland. The courtroom erupted. Forrest's lawyer looked like he might faint. Miss Grant, the judge's voice cut through the chaos. Are you admitting knowledge of hidden assets? Lauren's face went pale as she realized what she'd done. Josephine finally moved, but only to put her head in her hands. Your Honor, the DA smiled, we'd like to add tax evasion to the charges. The sentencing took less than an hour. 25 years, no possibility of parole. Full restitution to all victims. Every hidden account seized. Outside, reporters swarmed again, but this time I was ready. Today isn't about revenge, I announced. It's about justice, about standing up and saying enough is enough. Mom, Hugo called out. Look, a group of people was gathering at the bottom of the steps. More families, clutching newspapers and documents. Are you Mrs. Gomez? A woman stepped forward. We think we might be victims too. Different company names, but the same pattern. Of course they are. Josephine's voice came from behind us. She walked down the steps, her designer purse replaced by a simple leather bag. I have all the records, every deal, every fraud. I'm ready to testify. Lauren stared at her mother in horror. Mom, what are you doing? The right thing, Josephine replied. Finally, I looked at the growing crowd of people, all carrying stories of loss and betrayal. Then at my sons, standing tall and proud. At Jillian, already organizing people into groups, taking down names and details. Let's get to work, I said. There's more justice to be done. As we walked down the courthouse steps, Hugo squeezed my hand. Dad would be proud, Mom. He is proud, I replied, touching the wedding ring I still wore. And so am I, of all of us. Behind us, I heard Lauren wailing about her ruined life, but her voice was drowned out by the sounds of people coming together, sharing stories, finding strength in numbers. Sometimes revenge isn't about getting even. Sometimes it's about standing up and showing the world that truth still matters, that justice is still possible, and that no amount of money can buy what really matters: integrity, family, and the courage to do what's right. 6 months after Forrest's sentencing, I stood in front of the old downtown lot, watching construction crews tear down the abandoned buildings. Hugo and Milton flanked me, both wearing hard hats. The community center plans look amazing, Milton said, unrolling the blueprints. Computer lab, job training facilities, daycare for working parents. And look who's here to see it. Hugo nodded toward an approaching car. Josephine stepped out, looking different in jeans and a simple blouse. The past months had stripped away her artificial polish, revealing something more genuine underneath. The last of the restitution payments went through this morning, she said, joining us at the fence. 28 families made whole again. How's Lauren? Hugo asked quietly. In rehab, again. Josephine sighed. She's still angry, still blaming everyone but herself. But at least she's getting help. A familiar voice called out behind us. Mrs. Gomez, Channel 7 News. Can we get a statement about the community center? Actually, I smiled, I have something better to show you. I led them inside the construction zone, where dozens of people were gathering. Families we'd helped, wearing hard hats and carrying shovels. Today isn't just a groundbreaking, I announced, cameras rolling. It's a rebirth. Every person here was affected by corporate fraud, by people who valued profit over people. Now we're taking that pain and building something beautiful from it. Mom, Milton whispered, pointing to the site entrance. More cars were pulling up, families spilling out, carrying more shovels, more hope. The crowd grew until it filled the lot. Is this really happening? A woman asked, the same one who'd approached us at the courthouse. Are we really taking back what they stole? Better, I replied. We're creating something new, something they can never take away. The first shovel hit the dirt, then another and another. People who'd lost everything were now building something together. Mrs. Gomez, another reporter called out. What about the luxury condos that were planned for this site? The potential profits? Some things are worth more than money, I said, picking up a shovel. Like community, like justice. Josephine stepped forward, her voice carrying over the crowd. I'd like to make an announcement. I'm donating all my remaining assets to the Community Center Trust. It's time this money helped people instead of hurting them. The crowd cheered. Hugo hugged her, whispering something that made her eyes water. Look! Milton pointed to the street. A police car had pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, escorting a familiar figure. Lauren? Hugo breathed. She looked different, thinner, less polished, but somehow more real. The officers removed her handcuffs. She's been granted supervised release to participate in the community service program, Josephine explained. It was her idea. Lauren walked toward us slowly, her eyes on the ground. When she reached us, she finally looked up. I'm sorry, she said simply, for everything. I want to help make it right. Hugo handed her a shovel without a word. She took it, hands shaking slightly. The foundation goes here, Milton showed her, marking the spot, for the children's library. Lauren nodded and began to dig, tears mixing with dirt. Jillian appeared with coffee and donuts for everyone. Just like old times, she grinned at me. Remember when we used to bring these to Robert at his construction sites? He would have loved this, I said, watching the community come together. He always said buildings were just shells. It's the people inside them that matter. A small girl tugged at my sleeve. My mommy says you helped us get our house back. Can I help dig too? I found her a small garden spade, and soon she was working alongside Lauren, both of them focused on the task at hand. You did it, Mom, Hugo said, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. You got justice for Dad, for everyone. No, I corrected him. We did it, all of us. The sun climbed higher as we worked, transforming a place of broken dreams into something new. Reporters filmed as former victims became builders, as enemies became allies, as pain turned to purpose. What are you going to call it? Someone asked. I looked at the blueprint, at the space where the sign would go. then at my sons, at Josephine and Lauren working side by side, at all the families whose lives had been shattered and rebuilt. The Phoenix Center, I decided, because sometimes the most beautiful things rise from the ashes of what was lost. As if in response, the crowd began to dig faster, harder together. We weren't just breaking ground, we were breaking cycles of greed, of revenge, of pain. We were building something that would last longer than any fortune, hope. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Phoenix Center drew hundreds of people. As I stood at the podium, the morning sun caught the building's glass walls, making them shine like fire. "Cut it, Mom," Milton urged, holding out the giant scissors. But I shook my head, scanning the crowd. "Not yet. We're still missing someone." A murmur rippled through the gathering as a prison transport van pulled up. Two guards escorted Forrest out, his orange jumpsuit stark against the festive atmosphere. "Thank you for agreeing to this," I said as he approached, his shackles clinking. "I didn't have much choice," he replied quietly. "The parole board made it clear, show genuine remorse or stay inside. That's not why I invited you." I gestured to the building. "Look around, really look." The center bustled with life. Through the glass walls, we could see people setting up computer stations, stocking the library shelves, preparing the daycare rooms. Lauren was there, showing a group of kids how to use the art supplies. Josephine organized job training schedules at the front desk. "All these people," I continued, "they were your victims once. Now they're rebuilding their lives. Some are even rebuilding yours." Forrest's eyes found Lauren, watching her laugh with the children. "She seems different." "She is. We all are." I handed him one end of the ribbon. "Hold this." The crowd went silent as I raised the scissors. "This center stands as proof that justice doesn't have to end with punishment. It can lead to transformation." Snip. The ribbon fell, and applause erupted. As the guards led Forrest inside for the tour, Hugo appeared at my side. "Did you see who else came?" I followed his gaze to the back of the crowd. Robert's old business partners, the ones who'd survived Forrest's schemes, stood together. They raised their hands in greeting. Inside, the energy was electric. People moved from room to room, exclaiming over the facilities. The computer lab hummed with new machines. The job training center already had a waiting list. "Mrs. Gomez?" a small voice piped up. The little girl from the groundbreaking ceremony stood there, clutching a book. "Will you read to us? We're having the first story time." In the children's library, kids sprawled on colorful cushions as I opened the book. Through the window, I could see Milton showing Forrest the wall of success stories. People who'd rebuilt their lives after losing everything. "The phoenix rises from ashes," I read, not because it forgets the fire, but because it knows that new beginnings are possible. "Even for me?" Lauren's voice came from the doorway. She'd been listening, her eyes wet. "Especially for you." I patted the space beside me. "Come read with us." As Lauren took over the story, I slipped out to find Josephine at the front desk. "The first job training class is full," she reported, "and 3 of our people already have interviews." "Good." I watched Forrest being led back to the van. He paused, looking back at the center one last time. Sometimes the hardest part of justice is seeing its impact. "Mom," Milton called from the computer lab. "The virtual counseling program just went live. We've got people logging in from across the country." The day flew by in a blur of moments. Hugo teaching a business ethics class, using his own experience as a cautionary tale. Lauren organizing art therapy sessions. Josephine mentoring women returning to the workforce. As evening fell, I found myself alone in the main hall. The setting sun painted the walls in shades of orange and gold, like the phoenix itself was watching over us. "You did good, Robert," I whispered, touching my wedding ring. "Your letters led us here." "Mom!" Hugo and Milton appeared, carrying coffee. Everyone's gathering in the community room. They want to thank you. No, I shook my head. This isn't about thanks. It's about transformation, Lauren finished, joining us. That's what you taught me. Us. We walked to the community room together, where dozens of families waited. People whose lives had been shattered now stood tall, proud, ready to help others rise. To new beginnings, someone called out, raising a coffee cup. To justice, added another. To family, Hugo said, squeezing my hand. I looked around at all these people, victims turned survivors, enemies turned allies, broken dreams transformed into new purpose. To the phoenix in all of us, I said softly, may we always rise, stronger than before. Outside, the building's glass walls reflected the sunset, burning bright against the darkening sky. Not an ending, but a continuation. Not revenge, but renewal. And somewhere, I knew Robert was smiling.
My name is Emma. I lived a quiet life with my grandmother, Mabel, in a small, peaceful town. I didn't have much in terms of family. It was just me and Mabel against the world. Then I met Robert. He was charming, handsome, and caring. Or at least, that's what I thought initially. Robert came into my life like a fresh breeze. He was the kind of guy everyone liked instantly. He had a nice job, a lot of money, and he knew how to make me laugh. He would shower me with attention and make me feel like I was the only person in the world that mattered to him. "I've never met anyone like you, Emma," he used to say, looking deep into my eyes. "I feel the same, Robert. You make me so happy," I would reply, feeling like the luckiest woman alive. When he found out I was pregnant, he was over the moon and immediately asked me to marry him. "Emma, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" he asked. "I would love to, Robert," I said, tears in my eyes. Our wedding day was beautiful. Mabel cried tears of joy, seeing me so happy. "Oh, Emma, I've never seen you so radiant. I'm so happy for you, my dear," she said as she hugged me tight. The celebration was lavish, with dancing, laughter, and a sea of well-wishers. We promised to love and cherish each other, and I genuinely believed we would. We settled into his sprawling house, and for 2 months, everything was fine. I felt like I was living a dream. Robert was attentive and loving, and I was excited about the new life growing inside me. "I can't wait to meet our little one," I would tell him, my hand on my growing belly. "Me neither, Emma. We are going to be the happiest family," he'd say, smiling. But slowly, this dream began to fade. Robert began to come home late, and sometimes wouldn't come home at all. It felt like he was slipping away, and I couldn't understand why. This is how my story begins. A story of love that turned into pain, a dream that turned into a nightmare. But it is also a story of hope and the strength that can be found in the darkest times. And I'm here to tell it, in my own words, just the way it happened. In the beginning, life with Robert seemed perfect. But after a few months, I started to notice small changes. He'd stay out late, come home at odd hours, and sometimes not come home at all. One day, when he came home late, I decided to ask him about it. "Robert, is everything okay? You've been coming home so late recently." "Oh, Emma, it's just work. We've got this new project, and it's been taking up all my time," he said, avoiding my gaze. But the late nights became more frequent. I'd lie awake, worrying, wondering where he could be. The man who had once been so loving and attentive was slowly becoming a stranger. And then there were the calls. He'd get them at all hours and would always leave the room to answer them. "Who was that?" I would ask when he came back. "Just a work call," he'd reply sharply, ending the conversation before it could even begin. The tension was building, and I could feel it. I tried to talk to him, tried to understand what was going on. "Robert, we never talk anymore. What's happening with us? Nothing, Emma. Why do you always have to make a big deal out of everything? He'd snap. I was hurt, lost, and confused. This wasn't the man I had married, the man who had promised to love and cherish me. He was distant, irritable, and secretive. But every time I tried to confront him, he'd get angry. And then, like clockwork, he'd bring flowers and apologize. I'm so sorry, Emma. I didn't mean to raise my voice. It's just the stress from work. I just want us to be happy, Robert, like we used to be, I'd say, hoping to get through to him. But the apologies were short-lived, and soon enough, the cycle would repeat. It was like living with two different people, and I didn't know how much longer I could cope with it. The man I had fallen in love with was disappearing before my eyes, and I felt powerless to stop it. This is the phase where the winds began to shift, where the storm started brewing, unbeknownst to me. The happy dream was transforming into a distressing reality, and I was just beginning to see the signs. Life continued, and so did Robert's strange behavior. He seemed like he was living a double life, one that I wasn't a part of. I was scared and anxious, and I felt a sinking feeling that something was really wrong. One day, Robert rushed off to work, forgetting his phone at home. The device sat there, tempting me, a gateway to the truth I was so desperately seeking. Eventually, I couldn't resist. I picked it up and started going through his messages and calls. What I found was a trail of betrayal and deceit. Messages from different women, plans to meet up, declarations of affection. My heart was pounding, and I felt sick to my stomach. This was not the man I married. This was not the life I had envisioned for us. Hey, have you seen my phone? Robert's voice on the home phone brought me back to reality. You forgot it at home, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm coming back to get it. Don't touch it, he said, sounding alarmed. But it was too late. When he walked in and saw me with his phone, his face turned red with anger. What the hell are you doing, Emma? I told you not to touch it. I know about them, Robert. All of them, I shouted back, my voice breaking. How could you do this to me? It's not what you think, he yelled, trying to grab the phone from my hands. We argued, our voices loud and angry. But instead of resolving anything, Robert left the house, leaving me alone, betrayed, and broken. I was shattered, and the happy life I thought we had was just an illusion, a mask that Robert wore to hide his true self. Sitting alone in the silence of our home, the truth staring back at me from the screen of his phone, I felt lost. The love, the promises, the future we had planned, it was all a lie. And I was left to pick up the pieces of my broken heart, wondering if I would ever be able to trust and love again. The mask had been unveiled, revealing a painful reality I wasn't prepared for. My journey had taken a painful turn, and I had to find the strength to face it and move forward. In the wake of my discovery, the atmosphere in the house became tense and unbearable. We barely spoke, and when we did, it ended in an argument. I was living in a constant state of anguish and heartache. One day, one of our arguments escalated quickly. Robert's anger reached a boiling point I had never seen before. He shouted, his face contorted in rage. Why can't you just mind your own business, Emma? Why do you have to be so nosy? How can our marriage be my own business, Robert? You've been lying to me, betraying me. I shouted back, tears streaming down my face. In a sudden fit of rage, Robert lashed out, his fist connecting with my stomach. Pain seared through my body, and I fell to the floor, gasping for air. The room spun around me as I clutched my belly, fear and pain mixing into a horrible cocktail. Robert, suddenly realizing what he had done, called an ambulance, fabricating a story about how I had fallen down the stairs. The paramedics rushed me to the hospital, their faces etched with concern. Once at the hospital, the doctors ran a flurry of tests, their faces grave. Finally, the news came. I'm very sorry, Emma. but you've lost the baby," the doctor said gently, sorrow in his eyes. The pain was unbearable, a mixture of physical agony and a profound, soul-crushing loss. "I can't believe this is happening," I whispered, tears flowing freely. "I've lost everything. My baby, the tiny life Robert and I had created, was gone. And with it, the last remnants of the love I had felt for him. The pain was deep, a gaping wound in my soul that seemed like it would never heal. A week later, I was discharged from the hospital, a shell of my former self. Robert was there, flowers in hand, smiling as if nothing had happened. "Ready to go home, Emma?" he asked, as if he hadn't destroyed our lives. "I'm not going anywhere with you," I replied coldly, turning away from him. I went back to Mabel's small house, leaving Robert and the pain he had caused behind. I was broken, lost, and grieving, but I was determined to rebuild my life, to find happiness again, even if it seemed like a distant, impossible dream. This chapter of my life was one of profound loss and pain, a darkness I never thought I'd have to face. But it was also the catalyst for change, the push I needed to free myself from the toxic relationship I was in and start anew. Leaving Robert was a difficult decision, but I knew it was the right one. I moved back to my grandmother Mabel's home, a place of love and solace. Her house was small and cozy, filled with memories of my childhood, a stark contrast to the luxurious, hollow home I had shared with Robert. Mabel opened her doors and her heart to me without a second thought. "Oh, my dear, I'm so sorry for what you've been through," she said, enveloping me in a warm hug. "You're safe here." "I don't know what I would do without you, Grandma," I replied, tears in my eyes. "I feel so lost." "We'll get through this together, sweetie," Mabel assured me, holding my hand. "One day at a time." The days that followed were filled with pain and reflection. I would sit with Mabel, talking about life, love, and loss. She would share stories of her own struggles, her own heartaches, giving me strength and hope. "I've been through tough times too, Emma," she said one day, a distant look in her eyes. "But I learned that pain is a part of life, and we can't let it define us." "You're right, Grandma," I said, squeezing her hand. "I have to be strong, for myself and for the baby I lost." I started to rebuild my life, slowly and painfully. The safety and love of Mabel's home were the nurturing soil I needed to regrow my roots. I began to heal, to learn to live again, away from the shadows of betrayal and violence. Robert tried to reach out several times, sending flowers, letters filled with empty apologies and promises to change. "Emma, please, let's talk about this," he pleaded over the phone one day. "I can change, I promise." "I don't want your apologies, Robert," I said firmly. "You've caused enough pain. I want you to leave me alone." "Emma, don't do this. I love you. We can start over," he insisted, desperation in his voice. "There is no us, Robert. There never was," I replied, hanging up the phone. I severed all ties with him, focusing on my healing and my future. Mabel was my rock, supporting me every step of the way, reminding me of my worth and my strength. Returning to my roots, to the loving embrace of my grandmother, was the balm my wounded soul needed. It was a journey of rediscovery, of learning to love and trust again, and I was determined to emerge from it stronger and wiser. While I was staying with Mabel, healing from the trauma, I knew I couldn't let Robert just walk away without facing the consequences of his actions. I decided to fight back, to seek justice for myself and my lost child. I reached out to an organization that helps survivors of domestic violence. "We're here to support you," said Lisa, a counselor at the organization when I first met her. "We'll help you through this every step of the way." "Thank you, Lisa," I replied, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. "I just want him to pay for what he's done." "We'll do everything we can to make sure he does," Lisa assured me. The organization connected me with a lawyer, a kind and determined woman named Sarah. She listened to my story, her face stern and her eyes filled with resolve. "Emma, we're going to fight this. We'll make sure he doesn't hurt you or anyone else again." "I'm scared, Sarah," I admitted. "He's powerful and has a lot of connections." "We have the truth on our side," Sarah responded confidently, "and I promise I'll do everything in my power to protect you." The days leading up to the trial were stressful and exhausting. Robert's lawyer tried to discredit me, painting me as a jealous, unstable wife. "She's just trying to ruin my client's reputation because he wanted a divorce," he claimed in court. "That's not true," I retorted firmly, my voice steady despite the fear and anger boiling inside me. "I loved him, and he betrayed me. He hurt me and our unborn child." The trial was a grueling process, with witnesses, testimonies, and evidence being presented. The jury listened intently, their faces impassive. I felt vulnerable and exposed, but I also felt a burning desire for justice. Finally, the day came when the jury reached a verdict. My heart raced as the foreman stood up, the courtroom hanging on his every word. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of domestic violence and involuntary manslaughter." A wave of relief and vindication washed over me. Robert was sentenced to prison, and the court ordered him to pay compensation for the pain and suffering he had caused me. The fight for justice was a difficult and painful journey, but it was also empowering. It gave me a sense of closure and a chance to rebuild my life. The support of Mabel, Lisa, Sarah, and the organization gave me the strength to stand up to Robert, to make him face the consequences of his actions, and to finally start healing from the wounds he had inflicted. After the grueling trial, the final day arrived, the day the jury would present their verdict. I sat in the courtroom, my heart pounding, Mabel's hand tightly clasped in mine. Sarah, my lawyer, was sitting beside me, her face a mask of calm determination. "Whatever happens, Emma," she whispered to me, "know that you fought bravely. You've stood up to him, and that's a victory in itself." The tension in the room was palpable, the silence deafening, as we all waited for the jury to enter. When they finally did, my heart felt like it was going to leap out of my chest. The foreman stood and addressed the court. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Robert Johnson, guilty of all charges." A surge of mixed emotions rushed through me: relief, vindication, sorrow. I turned to Sarah, tears in my eyes. "Thank you, Sarah, for everything." "You deserved justice, Emma," Sarah replied, squeezing my hand. The judge addressed Robert sternly. "Mr. Johnson, you have been found guilty of causing grievous harm and the loss of an innocent life. You will serve your sentence, and I hope you reflect on the pain you've caused." Robert sat there, his face pale, his arrogance finally shattered. He looked at me, a mix of anger and regret in his eyes, but I met his gaze unflinchingly. "You've destroyed our lives, Robert," I said quietly, "but you won't destroy my future." After the verdict, Sarah and I stepped out of the courtroom, the sunlight feeling warm and comforting after the cold tension inside. "Emma, I'm so proud of you," Sarah said, embracing me. "You were strong, and you spoke your truth." "I couldn't have done it without you, Sarah," I responded, tears streaming down my face. "You've helped me find my voice, my strength." "You had it in you all along, Emma," Sarah replied with a smile. "Now, go live your life. You've earned your freedom, your peace." The verdict brought a sense of closure, a chance to finally start rebuilding my life. It was the end of a painful chapter, a chapter filled with betrayal, loss, and fight. But it was also the beginning of a new journey, a journey towards healing, self-discovery, and hopefully happiness. With the verdict delivered and Robert paying for his deeds, it was time for me to step into a new life, a life free from his shadows. I felt a mixture of relief, sorrow, and a fragile hope. I returned to Mabel's little house, to the warmth and simplicity of my roots. "I'm so proud of you, Emma," Mabel said, wrapping me in a tight hug as I entered the house. "You fought hard, my dear." "I'm just glad it's over, Grandma," I replied, tears filling my eyes. "I can finally start to heal." "You're stronger than you think, Emma," Mabel said, wiping away my tears. "You've been through so much, but look at you, standing tall." "I couldn't have done it without you, Grandma. Your love and support mean everything to me." As days turned into weeks, I started to rebuild my life, piece by piece. I focused on healing and rediscovering myself. I began attending a support group organized by the Domestic Violence Organization, where I met others who had experienced similar traumas. "You're not alone, Emma," said Lisa, as we sat in a circle sharing our stories. "We've all been through our battles, and we're here to support each other." "It's comforting to know that I'm not alone," I replied, "that there are people who understand what I've been through." The group became a sanctuary for me, a place where I could share my fears, my pain, my hopes without judgment. I formed bonds with other survivors, and together we embarked on the journey of healing. "I'm starting to see the light again," I shared with the group one day. "I'm starting to hope, to dream again." "And that's a big step, Emma," Lisa said with a warm smile. "Hold on to that hope. Let it guide you to a new beginning." With time, the pain began to fade, replaced by a newfound strength and a desire to help others. I decided to use my experience to advocate for domestic violence awareness and support. "I want to help others like me," I explained to Lisa one day. "I want to use my voice to make a difference." "You have a powerful story, Emma," Lisa responded, "and I believe you can make a huge impact. We're here to support you in any way we can." The journey was long and painful, but I found my way back to the light. I learned that I was not defined by the abuse I suffered, but by the strength I discovered within myself. I stepped into a new day, a day filled with hope, love, and a resolve to make a difference in the world. It was indeed a new dawn for me, a dawn that promised a life free from shadows and filled with possibilities.
Hey friends, I've got a story that's so satisfying, it could be straight out of a movie. You know those moments in life when you feel like you've hit the jackpot of revenge? Well, this is one of those stories. Let me set the stage. My name is Martha. A few months back, my father passed away. It was a tough time for our family, but we pulled together to get through it. Dad had always been a great provider, and he left behind a sizable estate, including the family home, some investments, and a vintage car collection that would make any car enthusiast drool. Now, here's where things take a turn. My older brother, Mark, suddenly became a little too interested in Dad's assets. He'd always been the black sheep of the family, and I should have seen it coming. At the funeral, he couldn't stop talking about how he should get the lion's share because he had kids to support and bills to pay. Classic Mark. I knew something was up when he started getting chummy with Dad's lawyer, Mr. Stevens. They'd have hushed conversations at family gatherings, and it all seemed fishy. I couldn't prove anything, though, until the day of the will reading. The whole family gathered in the lawyer's office, and there was an air of tension you could cut with a knife. Mr. Stevens began to read the will, and as expected, Mark got the lion's share of the estate, including the family home. My heart sank as I thought he'd won. But then Mr. Stevens paused, looked over his glasses, and dropped the bombshell of the century. Dad's will stipulated that Mark would only get those assets if he agreed to one condition. He had to live in the family home for a year, without selling it or renting it out. If he failed to meet this condition, everything would be split equally among the rest of the family, me included. Mark's face turned a shade of crimson I didn't know existed. He spluttered, protested, and even tried to argue, but Mr. Stevens was firm. It was like something out of a legal drama. The rest of us couldn't believe our luck. So there you have it, friends. Mark's greed got the best of him, and now he's stuck in Dad's house, fuming while the rest of us get our fair share. I'm not one to revel in another's misfortune, but this time, karma delivered a dish that was too delicious to resist. Listen to my story to the end, and I'll spill the beans on how Mark's year in the family home is going. It's going to be a wild ride, and I can't wait to share it with you all. I couldn't help but smile as Mr. Stevens calmly closed the will, effectively sealing Mark's fate. It was poetic justice at its finest, and I savored the moment. Mark, on the other hand, was livid. His face turned an alarming shade of red, and he shot daggers at Mr. Stevens. "You can't be serious," Mark shouted, his voice a mixture of anger and disbelief. "This is insane, and it's not what Dad would have wanted." Mr. Stevens, ever the composed lawyer, simply shrugged. "I'm just here to execute your father's wishes, Mark. He outlined this condition in his will, and we must respect it." My other siblings and I exchanged glances, trying to contain our excitement. We had always known Mark's true colors, but this was a whole new level of karma coming back to bite him. As the will reading continued, Mr. Stevens outlined the logistics of the condition. Mark had 30 days to move into the family home, and he couldn't sell it or rent it out for a year from the date of occupancy. If he violated these terms, the assets would be divided among the remaining siblings. Mark stormed out of the lawyer's office, vowing to fight this injustice in court. He even threatened to contest the will's validity. But deep down, we knew he was cornered. Dad had been meticulous in his planning, and Mr. Stevens assured us that the will was ironclad. Over the next few weeks, Mark reluctantly moved into the family home, bitterness oozing from every pore. We all helped with the transition, making sure he had no excuses to break the conditions. It was amusing to see him try to negotiate with us for leniency, but we held firm. This was Dad's final wish, and we intended to honor it. Mark's life in the family home was far from comfortable. He resented every moment spent there, surrounded by memories of our childhood and the life he so desperately wanted to escape. I couldn't help but relish in the sweet taste of revenge as I watched him grumble and complain. But there was one thing Mark didn't anticipate: the watchful eyes of the neighborhood. Our parents had lived in that house for decades, and the neighbors were like an extended family. They knew about Dad's will and the conditions he had set for Mark. It didn't take long for them to become Mark's unofficial surveillance team. Every time he tried to bring in a realtor or put the house on the market, someone would anonymously tip us off. Mark's frustration grew with each failed attempt. It was as if the universe was conspiring against him. As the days turned into weeks, Mark's resolve began to waver. He realized that he was trapped in a situation of his own making, and no amount of tantrums or threats could change that. The house, once a symbol of his potential windfall, had become a gilded cage. Next, I will tell you into the comical mishaps and neighborhood interventions that made Mark's year in the family home even more entertaining. Stay tuned, friends. Justice is being served one day at a time. As the weeks turned into months, Mark's predicament in the family home only grew more comical and bizarre, like a real-life sitcom unfolding before our eyes. It was a twisted form of poetic justice that I couldn't help but relish, given what he had put our family through. After all, he had unscrupulously seized our rightful inheritance, and now he was paying the price, quite literally, for his avarice and deceit. One of the most entertaining aspects of this entire ordeal was witnessing Mark's desperate attempts to maintain some semblance of his old life within the confines of the family home. You see, he had been a big shot in his upscale condo, living a life of opulence with a personal chef, a housekeeper, and a gardener to cater to his every whim. However, in the family home, he had to fend for himself, and the results were nothing short of comedic brilliance. I still vividly remember the time he tried to cook a meal for himself. It was an epic disaster of monumental proportions, a culinary catastrophe that would be legendary in family lore. Smoke billowed from the kitchen, and the shrill blaring of the fire alarm reverberated through the house as he desperately tried to salvage his burnt creation. We, the rightful heirs who had suffered his greed, rushed over, fearing for the safety of the house. Instead, we found Mark, frantically waving a dish towel in front of the alarm, his face smudged with soot, and his once impeccable chef's apron now a grimy, scorched rag. "You guys never had to deal with this," he yelled, pointing accusatory fingers at us, as if we were to blame for his culinary calamity. "I can't believe Dad's doing this to me." We couldn't help but chuckle at his culinary misadventure. It was a stark reminder that Mark was completely out of his element in the family home. His lavish lifestyle, which he had flaunted so shamelessly, had left him ill-prepared for the simple realities of everyday living that the rest of us had long since mastered. But the most satisfying moments of all were when the neighborhood, our silent allies, came to our aid. They had taken it upon themselves to enforce Dad's unorthodox conditions, ensuring that Mark didn't dare to try and circumvent them. If he so much as contemplated putting the house on the market, the local real estate agents would be discreetly informed about the will's ironclad stipulations. Once, Mark attempted to rent out a room in the house, perhaps thinking it would bring in some much-needed income. However, little did he know that one of the vigilant neighbors had assumed the role of a potential tenant, engaging in a charade that almost felt like an episode of a hidden camera prank show. At the very last moment, just as Mark was ready to seal the deal, the neighbor revealed the truth, leaving Mark flustered and fuming. His frustration knew no bounds, and we reveled in his exasperation. As the months dragged on, Mark's relationship with the neighborhood soured further. He had unwittingly become the pariah of the community, and people avoided him like the plague. His desperate attempts to garner sympathy from the very people he had once ignored or treated with disdain were met with icy indifference. It was poetic justice at its finest, a symphony of retribution conducted by the universe itself. Mark had grievously underestimated the power of unity within a close-knit neighborhood, and it had become his undoing. The collective strength of the community was a force to be reckoned with, and Mark was discovering this firsthand. But there was still one final twist in this tale of revenge, a revelation that left us all dumbfounded. Next, I will tell you how Mark's tumultuous year in the family home took an unexpected turn, shaking the very foundations of our family's legacy. Stay with me, friends, because this story is about to get even juicier. As the seasons changed and a year passed since Dad's funeral, the drama surrounding Mark's residency in the family home took an unexpected turn. It was as if fate had decided to add one final twist to this bizarre tale of revenge, and it left us all in a state of bewilderment. You see, despite the absurd conditions laid out in Dad's will, Mark had managed to hold on to the family home for an entire year. He had endured the comedic mishaps, the neighborhood's vigilant surveillance, and the utter isolation he had brought upon himself. But he was unyielding in his determination to cling to the house, convinced that he would outlast the stipulations of the will. However, Mark had overlooked a crucial detail, one that would prove to be his downfall. The family home was an aging structure, and its maintenance required not only financial resources, but also a deep understanding of its quirks and idiosyncrasies. Mark possessed neither. At first, we noticed minor issues: a leaky roof, a malfunctioning furnace, and creaking floorboards. Mark, in his arrogance, believed he could simply hire contractors to address these problems. But what he failed to realize was that the house had a peculiar temperament, and it seemed to rebel against his presence. The leaky roof became an incessant drip, defying all attempts at repair. The furnace emitted eerie, discordant noises that kept Mark awake at night, and the creaking floorboards seemed to whisper haunting secrets. It was as if the house itself had joined the neighborhood in its silent revolt against its unwelcome occupant. Mark's frustration grew day by day. He hired a slew of contractors, each more bewildered than the last by the house's bizarre behavior. Plumbers scratched their heads as pipes seemed to change course at will. Electricians were confounded by switches that operated in reverse, and carpenters found themselves entangled in a maze of hidden passages behind walls. His financial resources began to dwindle as he poured money into futile attempts to tame the rebellious house. The neighborhood, well aware of his predicament, watched with a mixture of amusement and satisfaction. It was as if the house itself had become an active participant in our quest for revenge. Mark's sleepless nights and growing desperation were a source of dark amusement for us. He would often emerge from the house in disheveled attire, hair askew, and eyes bloodshot from lack of rest. His once confident demeanor had crumbled, replaced by a haunted look that mirrored the house's own peculiar personality. But it was during a stormy night that the house unleashed its most spectacular display of defiance. As thunder rumbled and rain lashed against the windows, Mark was jolted awake by a cacophony of crashing and banging. He stumbled through the darkened corridors, his flashlight barely penetrating the gloom. What he discovered was a scene straight out of a horror movie. Furniture levitated, seemingly of its own volition, and household objects danced through the air. The walls vibrated with an otherworldly energy, and the very foundation of the house trembled. It was as if the house had awakened its dormant spirits to expel the intruder. Mark fled the house in terror, leaving behind his belongings and his illusions of conquest. As he stood in the pouring rain, drenched and defeated, the neighborhood watched in eerie silence. The house had made its final verdict, and Mark had been judged unworthy. In the aftermath of this supernatural spectacle, Mark decided he had had enough. He relinquished his claim to the family home, realizing that some forces were beyond human comprehension. The house, it seemed, had exacted its revenge in the most enigmatic and poetic manner. And so, friends, our family home returned to us, no longer tainted by Mark's presence. The neighborhood, our steadfast allies, rejoiced in silence, knowing that justice had been served. Mark, once a symbol of greed and betrayal, faded into obscurity. But the tale doesn't end here. Next, I'll share the ultimate twist in this saga, an unexpected discovery that shed light on Dad's true intentions and left us with a newfound appreciation for the eccentricities of our family home. Stay tuned for the grand finale. As the dust settled on Mark's hasty departure from our family home, we thought the tale had reached its conclusion. The house, having successfully defended itself against the invader, returned to its serene, if slightly quirky, state. The neighborhood, once rife with intrigue and espionage, resumed its usual rhythms, and life appeared to return to normal. But as fate would have it, the final act of this peculiar drama was still waiting in the wings. It was a revelation that would not only astonish us, but also provide closure to the enigmatic legacy our father had left behind. In the days following Mark's departure, I began the arduous task of sorting through the accumulated detritus he had left behind. It was a Herculean effort, as he had seemingly abandoned most of his possessions in his panicked flight from the house. Among the discarded items, I stumbled upon an old leather-bound journal, weathered by time and neglect. Curiosity piqued, I opened the journal to find the handwritten entries of our father, dating back several decades. It was a chronicle of his thoughts, dreams, and aspirations. A glimpse into the mind of a man who had always been somewhat of an enigma to us. As I read through the pages, a pattern began to emerge. Our father's writing spoke of his love for the family home, his fascination with its idiosyncrasies, and his deep connection to the neighborhood. It was clear that the house held a special place in his heart, and he had dedicated years to understanding its mysteries. But the most astonishing revelation came when I reached the final entries of the journal. In those pages, our father had detailed a plan that would ultimately lead to Mark's downfall and the house's triumphant defense. He had orchestrated the entire series of events, from the eccentric will to the house's rebellious antics. It was all part of his grand scheme to ensure that the family home remained untouched by those who did not truly appreciate its quirks. In his own words, he had written, "Only those who understand the heart of this house deserve to inherit it. I will test them as the house has tested me." It was a revelation that left me both astounded and moved. Our father had devised this elaborate ruse, not out of malice, but out of love for the house he had called home for so many years. He had used his eccentricity and flair for the dramatic to protect the place he held dear. And so, friends, the story comes to a close with a newfound appreciation for our father's legacy. The house, once a symbol of revenge, now stood as a testament to his love and ingenuity. Mark's brief tenure had inadvertently become a test of character, and he had failed spectacularly. As for us, we continued to live in the house, embracing its quirks and mysteries with open hearts. It was a daily reminder of our father's eccentricity and his deep affection for the place he had called home. The neighborhood, once divided by suspicion, had come together in a shared understanding of the house's unique magic. In the end, it was a tale of revenge turned redemption, of a house that defended itself, and of a father's enduring love. And as I write these final words, I can't help but smile, knowing that our family home will continue to enchant and confound generations to come. Thank you for joining me on this extraordinary journey, friends. And remember, sometimes the most unusual stories hold the deepest truths.
I'm Sarah, and life for me had always been a high-wire act of sorts. In our family, there were a few key players: my husband Mark, our charming bundle of joy Liam, and the ever-present, sometimes overbearing Linda, my mother-in-law. These characters, well, they shaped the story of our lives in ways I couldn't have predicted. Linda, a quintessential grandma, was a constant presence. She had this knack for doting on Liam like he was the heir to a throne. Anytime I needed to dash off to one of those nerve-wracking job interviews, which felt like they were multiplying faster than rabbits, Linda was my go-to babysitter. She'd step in without a second thought, a beacon of reliability amidst my job-seeking chaos. Linda's past as a retired kindergarten teacher had always made me feel at ease, leaving Liam in her care. Her nurturing and loving demeanor had been a source of comfort, and it had seemed natural to rely on her when I needed help. Little did I know that the events that would unfold would challenge my trust in her and the delicate balance of our family. One bright, sunny day, my phone rang with a call that felt like a ray of hope breaking through the clouds. I had scored a job offer. The elation I felt was almost surreal. It wasn't just a job, it was a lifeline for our family. But as I shared the news with Mark and Linda, little did I know that this newfound stability would tip the scales in unexpected ways. Sitting around the worn kitchen table, I brought up the pressing matter of a car. With the new job, I'd need it for the daily commute. Seems reasonable, right? But then, Linda dropped a bombshell. "You're planning to spend all that money on a car?" Linda's voice was tinged with disbelief. "What about our anniversary trip to that lovely resort? I thought you and Mark were going to treat us." I blinked, bewildered by the sudden twist in the narrative. Linda seemed convinced that the money we were about to shell out for the car should have been spent on her anniversary getaway. It was a plot twist of epic proportions, and I wasn't prepared for it. "Mom," Mark interjected, trying to reason with her, "the car is essential for Sarah's job. We can't afford both right now." Linda wasn't backing down. "You're both being selfish," she snapped, the disappointment in her eyes weighing heavily on us. What started as a reasonable conversation soon turned into an intense argument, the tension palpable. Our family's delicate equilibrium had been disrupted, and we were teetering on the precipice of a tumultuous journey we couldn't foresee. So, after the argument about the car and the anniversary trip, things were pretty tense in our family. But amidst all the chaos and misunderstanding, there was a glimmer of hope. Let me tell you how the silver lining began to peek through. Mark and I knew we needed that car for my new job. We just couldn't afford to delay it any longer. We had long talks late into the night, trying to figure out how to make it work. It wasn't just about convenience. It was about securing a stable future for Liam and us. Linda, on the other hand, was still sulking. She wasn't speaking much to us, and when she did, it was often icy and curt. It was tough, no doubt about it. I missed the way things used to be, when Linda was like a second mother to me. One evening, after we'd put Liam to bed, Mark and I sat down to address the elephant in the room. We needed to find a way to mend things with Linda while staying true to our priorities. "Maybe we should talk to her again," Mark suggested cautiously. I nodded, feeling a bit apprehensive. "You're right. Let's try to make her understand our situation, Mark. It's not like we're denying her a trip on purpose." The next day, we approached Linda. Her initial reaction was still cold, but as we explained our reasons, her expressions started to soften. "I just thought you were putting your jobs ahead of family," Linda admitted, her voice tinged with regret. "Mom," Mark said gently, "we're doing this for Liam's future, too. We want the best for him." As the conversation continued, we realized that Linda had misunderstood our intentions. She thought we were neglecting her for our careers, when all we wanted was stability and security for our family. Slowly but surely, the rift began to heal. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but things got better. Linda understood our perspective, and we, in turn, made an effort to involve her more in our daily lives. We realized that family support was crucial, and we didn't want to lose that. The silver lining was that this challenging period helped us communicate better as a family. It made us appreciate each other's roles and sacrifices. And as we moved forward, we hoped that this newfound understanding would help us navigate the trials that lay ahead. Little did we know that the story was far from over, and more challenges were yet to come. With our family on the mend after the car and trip argument, things started to look up. But, life sometimes takes unexpected turns. This time, it came in the form of an unforeseen twist. Linda had always been a big part of our lives. She'd take care of Liam when we needed her, and we appreciated that. But after our heart-to-heart chat, things had changed. Linda seemed less involved, less like the grandma we knew. It was like a cold wind had swept through our family. One evening, we had another family dinner, but it felt different. Linda had a tense look on her face as she served the meal. Something was up, and I could feel it. As we sat down to eat, Linda hesitated, and then she just blurted it out. "I can't believe you're spending all that money on a car instead of our anniversary trip." Mark and I exchanged glances, stunned by her outburst. "Mom," Mark started, "we talked about this. The car is for Sarah's job, and it's important." Linda's eyes welled up, and I could see the hurt in her face. "I thought you cared about me," she said, her voice trembling. "We do care, Mom," I reassured her, "but this is about our family's future." That's when Linda dropped the bomb. "Fine. If you won't take us on the trip, I won't be able to afford to feed Liam anymore. I won't have extra money for his lunches." I felt my heart sink. She was using Liam as a pawn in our argument, and it was the last thing I expected. I couldn't believe she'd stoop so low. Mark was furious. "You can't do that, Mom. Liam is your grandson. You can't just stop taking care of him." But Linda was adamant. "I have to make sacrifices too," she said, her eyes filled with resentment. That dinner was one of the most uncomfortable moments of my life. We finished our meal in silence, and as we left, the tension hung heavy in the air. It was shocking to see how far things had escalated. Linda, who had always been a loving grandma, was now using Liam as a bargaining chip in our family dispute. This wasn't the Linda we knew, and it left us reeling. The delicate balance we had tried so hard to restore had once again been thrown into disarray. After the shock of Linda threatening to stop feeding Liam, our family life took a dark turn. It was like a thread had been pulled, and everything began to unravel. Liam was just a child, innocent and unaware of the tensions between us and his grandma. He still looked forward to visiting Linda, but as the days passed, he came home hungry and upset. I couldn't believe she was actually going through with it. Mark and I knew we had to have another conversation with Linda. It was clear that things couldn't continue this way. So we invited her over for dinner, hoping to find a resolution. As we sat down at the table, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken tension. We didn't want to argue, but we couldn't let Linda's actions continue either. "Mom," Mark began cautiously, "we need to talk about Liam. He's hungry when he comes home, and it's not fair to him." Linda didn't back down. "I told you, I can't afford it with the money you're spending on that car." I could see the frustration in Mark's eyes. "Mom, you can't punish Liam like this. He's just a little boy." But Linda remained stubborn. I have my needs too. You should be taking us on that trip. The conversation went in circles, and it became clear that Linda wasn't willing to budge. She saw this as a way to pressure us into funding her trip, and it was tearing our family apart. We left that dinner with heavy hearts, knowing that we had to protect Liam from this toxic situation. We decided not to take him to visit Linda anymore until this was resolved. It was a difficult decision, but we couldn't let our son be used as a pawn in this battle. Our family was unraveling, and we needed to find a way to put it back together. As days turned into weeks, our family remained at an impasse. The decision to stop taking Liam to visit Linda was one of the hardest choices we'd ever made. Liam, at such a tender age, didn't understand the intricacies of the conflict. He missed spending time with his grandma and kept asking when we were going to visit her again. It broke my heart to see him so confused and hurt. Mark and I would sit down and discuss our options late into the night, trying to find a solution. We knew that keeping Liam away from Linda was causing him pain, but we couldn't let her continue using him as a pawn. One evening, as Liam played with his toys, I looked at Mark with tear-filled eyes. I hate that we're doing this to him, but we can't let her manipulate us with his well-being. Mark nodded, his expression heavy with sadness. I know, Sarah. It's tearing me apart too, but we have to protect our son. And so, we continued to keep Liam away from Linda. It was an agonizing decision, but we hoped that it would force Linda to reconsider her actions. We were determined to make her understand that we couldn't be blackmailed into funding her trip. Weeks turned into months, and our communication with Linda remained sparse. The pain of not having her in our lives was immense, but we held firm in our belief that this was the only way to resolve the conflict. We hoped that eventually, Linda would come to see the error of her ways, and we could rebuild our family's trust. Little did we know that the next chapter in our story would bring an unexpected turn, one that would take place at Linda's anniversary party and would have repercussions we couldn't have predicted. Months had passed since we made the painful decision to keep Liam away from Linda. Our family remained divided, and it was clear that the rift was not going to heal easily. But as Linda's anniversary party approached, we had no idea just how significant that event would become. We debated whether or not to attend, but Mark felt it was important to show that we still cared about Linda, even though we disagreed with her actions. So, with mixed feelings, we decided to go. The party was a grand affair, filled with friends and family, all celebrating Linda's anniversary. The atmosphere was cheerful, but the tension between us was palpable. As the evening wore on, I noticed Linda watching us closely, her eyes filled with a mix of longing and resentment. It was as though she expected us to make amends by offering to fund her trip. I had had enough of the charade, and I decided it was time to make a statement. I took a plate of food and, without saying a word, I shared it with Liam. It was a small but deliberate act, and it spoke volumes. Other guests at the party began to notice and started asking questions. "Why is Liam eating separately?" one of Linda's friends inquired. I took a deep breath and decided it was time to tell the truth. Liam was going hungry because we couldn't afford his lunches after buying a car for my job. Linda thought we should have used that money for her anniversary trip. The shock on their faces was evident, and whispers began to spread throughout the room. Linda's attempt to manipulate us had been exposed, and the guests were not pleased. Linda tried to defend herself, but it was clear that her actions had crossed a line. The party atmosphere soured, and we left shortly after, with our heads held high. That night marked a turning point. We had stood up for ourselves and for Liam, and we had let the truth be known. It was a defiant act, one that would change the course of our relationship with Linda forever. In the aftermath of the party, we decided to cut ties with Linda altogether. The chapter of our lives that had revolved around her had come to an end, and we were ready to move forward as a family, free from manipulation and deceit. Months had passed since the painful rift between us and Linda. The decision to keep Liam away from his beloved grandma had weighed on our hearts every single day. Yet, as Liam's longing for her grew more palpable, Mark and I found ourselves reconsidering our stance. Liam would often ask about his grandma, wondering why we hadn't been to visit her. It was heart-wrenching to see him miss her so much. One evening, as he clutched his favorite stuffed animal, he looked up at us with big, questioning eyes. "Mama, Dada, when are we going to see Grandma again?" His innocent inquiry tugged at our heartstrings. Mark glanced at me, his expression filled with concern. It was a question we couldn't ignore any longer. "Sarah," he whispered, "maybe it's time to think about reconnecting with Linda." I hesitated. The memories of the pain Linda had caused us still fresh in my mind. But deep down, I knew that we couldn't keep Liam away from his grandma forever. We needed to find a way to bridge the gap. The decision was made, and we decided to reach out to Linda, inviting her to our home. It was a fragile step toward reconciliation, one filled with hope, but also trepidation. The day Linda came to visit, the air was thick with unresolved tension. As she entered our home, the awkwardness hung like a cloud, a stark contrast to the warm embraces that used to define our family gatherings. We exchanged polite greetings, but the weight of our past conflicts hung between us like an invisible barrier. As we settled in the living room, the silence felt suffocating. Over cups of tea, we finally began to talk. Mark and I shared our reasons for keeping Liam away and the pain it had caused us. Linda, for the first time, listened without interruption, her eyes filled with regret. "I never meant to hurt Liam," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I let my desire for that trip blind me to everything else." We took a deep breath and told Linda how important it was for us to protect our son from emotional manipulation. We made it clear that we wanted her to be a part of Liam's life, but on terms that respected our family's well-being. Tears were shed, apologies were exchanged, and for the first time in a long while, there was a glimmer of hope for our family. It was a fragile reconnection, one that we knew would require time, patience, and understanding. As Linda left, we watched her go with a sense of cautious optimism. We were hoping that this conversation would bring healing and a chance for our family to rebuild what had been broken. Our attempts to rebuild a connection with Linda had been a delicate process, but there was an elephant in the room that neither Mark nor I had expected to address so soon: Linda's unresolved desire for the missed anniversary trip. One evening, as we gathered around the dinner table, the conversation took an unexpected turn. Linda, who had been more reserved about her disappointment lately, seemed unable to keep it in any longer. "You know," she began hesitantly, "I still can't help but feel disappointed about missing that trip." Mark and I exchanged glances, knowing that this was a discussion we needed to have sooner or later. We had hoped it wouldn't come up so soon, but it seemed that Linda couldn't contain her feelings any longer. "Mom," Mark said gently, "we've explained why we couldn't afford both the car and the trip. It wasn't an easy decision." Tears welled up in Linda's eyes, and her voice trembled with emotion. "I just thought you were putting your jobs ahead of family," she admitted, her disappointment and hurt becoming more evident. "We do care, Mom," I reassured her. "But this is about our family's future. We have to make the best choices for Liam and us." The conversation went in circles, and it became clear that Linda wasn't willing to let go of her desire for the trip. She saw this as a way to pressure us into funding her dream vacation. But what happened next blindsided us all. A few days after that dinner, Linda, in a moment of carelessness, made a slip of the tongue. She was talking to her sister-in-law, Carol, on the phone, and in the midst of their conversation blurted out, You won't believe it, Carol. Mark and Sarah are finally getting us that resort trip for our anniversary. The words hung in the air, and Linda's eyes widened as she realized what she had just revealed. Her sister-in-law's reaction was a mixture of surprise and confusion. You mean Mark and Sarah are paying for your trip? Carol asked. Her curiosity piqued. Linda backtracked, trying to downplay her slip. Oh, I meant they're considering it, as a surprise. But it was too late. The cat was out of the bag, and Carol was left with the impression that Mark and I were planning a surprise anniversary trip for Linda and her husband. Word spread like wildfire in Linda's circle of friends and family. The news of our supposed generosity reached the ears of many, and they couldn't help but share their thoughts and congratulations. As the days went by, the situation became increasingly awkward. Linda's slip of the tongue had created a false narrative, one that we hadn't intended. Mark and I found ourselves caught in a web of expectations and assumptions, and it seemed that Linda wasn't eager to correct the misunderstanding. The constant pressure from Linda's intrusive requests had left Mark and me feeling exhausted. It seemed there was no end to her expectations, and we began to wonder if there was a way to put an end to this cycle of emotional manipulation. One evening, after much deliberation, we made a bold decision. We decided to give in to Linda's demands, but with a cunning twist that would ensure she'd think twice before asking for more. It was time to prove a point and regain control of our family's boundaries. In a move designed to both appease and discourage, we selected a trip for Linda and her husband. It was the most inexpensive option we could find, a journey to a destination so obscure that it was challenging to locate on a map. To make our scheme foolproof, we ensured that the place had no internet access. The day we presented the itinerary to Linda and her husband, their faces lit up with anticipation. They believed it was the extravagant getaway they had been dreaming of. With excitement in their eyes, they eagerly examined the flight details and accommodations we had arranged. Unbeknownst to them, the remote destination was intentionally chosen to be off the grid. Once they arrived, they would be disconnected from the online world, with no means to contact us. To seal the deal, we turned off our cell phones, ensuring there would be no way for Linda to voice her complaints or demands. As Linda and her husband embarked on their adventure, they were blissfully unaware of our crafty plan. Their vacation was indeed memorable, but not in the way they had anticipated. In the aftermath of these events, Linda stopped contacting us, and we had no intention of following her lead and giving in to her emotional manipulation. We had made our point and regained control of the boundaries that were essential for our family's well-being.
Hey there, friends. Strap in, 'cause I've got a tale that'll make your jaw drop. We've all been through those moments when our gut tells us something's off and curiosity gets the best of us. Well, this is one of those stories, but trust me, it's a roller coaster of emotions. So, there's me, living a seemingly happy life with my hubby, Daniel. We had been married for 5 years, and everything felt peachy until it didn't. You see, Daniel had been working a high-stress job at some fancy corporate office. He'd often come home late, worn out, and claimed it was the workload. I thought it was the classic workaholic spiel, and I was understanding. I mean, love and support, right? One evening, though, something changed. I was looking for my lost phone, and what do I find? A stack of letters tucked away in the back of his desk drawer, each addressed to him from a mysterious sender with no return address. They looked old, and their edges were frayed, as if someone had read them over and over again. Naturally, I started wondering, who is this secret pen pal of my husband's? Why are these letters hidden away? And the biggest question of all, why hadn't he mentioned them to me? I couldn't resist the urge to open one of the letters. Call me nosy, but these secrets were gnawing at my sanity. So I delicately slid a letter from its envelope and began to read, my heart pounding. The letter was from a woman named Lily, and she poured her heart out about missing Daniel terribly. She mentioned memories they had shared, moments of passion, and their dreams of a future together. It was a love letter, no doubt. But wait, it got worse. Lily signed off as "Your forever love." My stomach did somersaults. Your forever love? What kind of melodramatic nonsense was this? And why did it sound so personal? I thought of Daniel, who was in the next room, probably wrapping up another late night at the office. My mind raced with questions, and as I read more letters, the reality began to sink in. What the heck was my husband hiding, and how long had he been hiding it? It was time to put on my detective hat and get to the bottom of this mess. All right, folks, thanks for sticking around. When we last left off, I had discovered those mysterious letters tucked away in Daniel's desk. Now, I'm about to dive deeper into this web of secrets and lies. Buckle up. The letters from Lily shook me to my core, but I needed more concrete evidence. So, what's a determined wife to do? Well, I knew I had to confront Daniel, but I had to be smart about it. After all, this was a man who'd managed to hide these letters for who knows how long. The next day, I decided to drop a little hint. I casually mentioned to him that I had found some old love letters from an ex-boyfriend while cleaning the attic. I watched his reaction like a hawk, but all I got was an awkward chuckle and a dismissive, "Oh, really? You should throw them away." It wasn't the reaction I had hoped for, but it was something. I knew I needed to dig deeper. So I embarked on my little mission, which included late-night snooping, phone checking, I know, but desperate times, and even following him a couple of times. One evening, he said he had to go to the office for an emergency. Red flags waving, right? So guess what? I decided to tail him, just like in those cheesy spy movies. I parked my car a few blocks away from his office building and watched as he entered the seemingly empty office. My heart pounding, I waited for a while, then stealthily made my way to the building. I used my best ninja moves to sneak in, and lo and behold, I heard hushed voices coming from his office. Sneaking closer, I peeked through the frosted glass window and saw him, Daniel, talking to a woman, the mysterious Lily herself. My heart felt like it was going to leap out of my chest. They were too engrossed in their conversation to notice me. I couldn't hear everything, but their body language said it all. It was intimate, and my blood boiled. I snapped a quick picture with my phone as evidence, my hands trembling like crazy. I had proof now, but I needed to play this smart. I slinked away from the scene, my mind racing. Revenge was coming, but it had to be perfect. I spent the next few days gathering more information, and what I uncovered was mind-boggling. It seemed like Daniel and Lily had been involved for years, even before we got married. My world shattered as I realized the extent of his betrayal. But here's the twist, friends. I wasn't about to let this betrayal break me. Nope, I had a plan, and it was deliciously wicked. Okay, the plot was thickening, and it was time for yours, truly, to unleash Operation Sabotage. Revenge was a dish best served cold, right? First, I needed to gather more information about Lily, the mysterious woman who had been tearing my world apart. I did some online sleuthing. Thank you, Internet, and found out she worked at a nearby marketing agency. Armed with this knowledge, I made a cunning plan. I dressed up like a corporate spy, complete with oversized sunglasses and a trench coat. Yes, I went full-on undercover mode. I strolled into her office building and did my best impression of a lost tourist, asking the receptionist for directions to her office. With her help, I made it to Lily's floor, where her colleagues thought I was some new big-shot client. I finally spotted her office, discreetly checked her nameplate, and snapped a quick picture. Score. I had her full name now, Lily Walker. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I retreated from the scene, feeling like James Bond's long-lost cousin. Next stop, social media. I stalked her profiles like it was my job, and guess what I found? her upcoming high school reunion. I concocted a brilliant plan. I created a fake Facebook profile, pretending to be a fellow high school alumnus, and requested to join the reunion group. I spent hours crafting my backstory and building my character. I even photoshopped a vintage yearbook photo to match the others. Nailed it. Once inside the group, I started planting seeds of doubt. I posted cryptic messages about how some people never change and dropped hints about secrets from the past. The buzz started growing, and people began whispering about old scandals. But I wasn't done yet. I messaged Lily privately, pretending to be a concerned classmate who had heard rumors about her affair with a married man. Oh boy, she took the bait. She replied, all flustered and defensive, denying everything. But her reaction told me everything I needed to know. I knew I had her right where I wanted her, panicked and paranoid. My plan was working like a charm, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. But revenge is a dish best served with a side of patience, my friends. I was just getting started. So, Lily was starting to feel the heat. She was on edge, constantly glancing over her shoulder at the reunion, wondering who was stirring the pot. Her perfect little world was unraveling, and I was here for every delicious moment. The reunion was just around the corner, and I knew I had to turn up the heat. I reached out to some of my real high school friends and filled them in on my plan. They were all too eager to help bring Lily down a notch, considering what she'd done to me. We decided to create a fake, scandalous story about Lily and an anonymous, well-known figure, adding just enough details to make it believable. We crafted a narrative that would send shockwaves through the reunion. Lily was about to become the talk of the town. I posed as an anonymous tipster and sent this juicy piece of gossip to a local gossip blog. You know the type, always hungry for the next big scoop. The story spread like wildfire, and before long, everyone in our hometown was buzzing about it. The reunion arrived, and the tension was palpable. People were whispering, exchanging knowing glances, and Lily was clearly rattled. She tried to put on a brave face, but I could see the cracks in her composure. Revenge had never tasted so sweet. As the night wore on, the fake story continued to circulate. People approached Lily, asking her about the scandalous affair. She vehemently denied it, of course, but doubt had already taken root in people's minds. Her reputation was in shambles, and I couldn't help but relish in her misery. But I wasn't finished. I had one more ace up my sleeve. I knew Lily's weakness, her vanity. She prided herself on her appearance and reputation, and I was about to exploit that. I arranged for a friend to accidentally spill a glass of red wine on her pristine white dress. The gasps and whispers that followed were music to my ears. Lily was mortified, her face a mask of humiliation. With my plan in full swing, I retreated from the chaos I'd created, satisfied that my revenge was hitting its mark. But there was still more to come, dear friends. As the reunion unfolded, the tension was electric. Lily was caught in a web of deceit, and I was the puppeteer pulling the strings. But there was one finale act left to stage. I watched from the shadows as Lily struggled to salvage her reputation. The scandalous affair story had spread like wildfire, and no amount of denial could extinguish the flames. She was cornered, desperate, and on the verge of unraveling completely. Then came my pièce de résistance. I had convinced my friend, Sarah, to approach Lily with a proposition, an opportunity to clear her name. Sarah posed as a well-connected figure in town, offering to help Lily expose the anonymous tipster behind the scandal. It was an offer too tempting for Lily to resist. The plan was simple, yet brilliant. We would lure Lily into a trap of her own making. Sarah promised to meet Lily in a secluded part of the reunion venue, away from prying eyes. Lily, desperate for redemption, took the bait. As they met in the dimly lit corner, I watched from a distance, my heart pounding with anticipation. Sarah, with a sly grin, told Lily that she had uncovered the identity of the tipster. Lily leaned in, eager to hear the name, her face a mixture of hope and dread. And then the bombshell dropped. "It's Karen," Sarah said with a wicked smile. "Your little sister." Lily's eyes widened in shock, and she stumbled back as if struck by lightning. Her world came crashing down around her, and she realized the depths of her own downfall. She had been played like a fiddle, and I reveled in the sweet taste of victory. But that wasn't the end of it. As Lily tried to process the revelation, I stepped out of the shadows, finally revealing myself. The look on her face was a priceless blend of horror and realization. "You!" she stammered, her voice trembling. "It was you all along?" I nodded, relishing the moment. "Surprised, Lily? You underestimated me, just like you always did. But it's time you faced the consequences of your actions." The reunion attendees, drawn by the commotion, gathered around, witnessing the unmasking of the devious mastermind behind the scandal. Lily's humiliation was complete. As the truth sunk in, Lily was left humbled and defeated. Her carefully constructed world had crumbled, and there was no escaping the consequences of her deceit. Revenge had been served, and it was a dish best served cold. So, dear friends, that's the climax of my story, the moment when Lily's reign of terror came crashing down, but there's still an epilogue left to tell. After the dramatic unmasking at our high school reunion, I watched Lily's life spiral into chaos. The fallout was intense, to say the least. Friends distanced themselves from her, and her reputation lay in tatters. Her affair with my ex-husband was now public knowledge, and the scandal became the talk of the town. But this wasn't just about exposing her secrets. It was about teaching her a lesson. Lily had underestimated me for far too long, and it was time she learned that her actions had consequences. Lily's marriage to my ex, Daniel, crumbled under the weight of the affair. He couldn't bear the shame and guilt, and their relationship imploded. He moved out of town, leaving Lily alone to deal with the wreckage of her life. Meanwhile, I had found unexpected solace in my newfound friendships at the reunion. People who had once been mere acquaintances became my confidants. We laughed together, reminisced about old times, and bonded over shared experiences. I realized that I wasn't alone in this journey. I had a support system that cared about me. As for Daniel, well, he had learned a harsh lesson about the consequences of his actions. His relationship with Lily had fallen apart, and he was left to pick up the pieces of his own life. He tried to reach out to me, but I had no interest in rekindling our past. My focus was on healing and moving forward. In the midst of all this chaos, I received an unexpected message from an unlikely source. My sister, Susan. She had witnessed the unraveling of Lily's life and reached out to me, seeking forgiveness and reconciliation. She had seen the error of her ways and wanted to make amends. Susan, always the more emotionally expressive of the two, rebelled against the injustice of it all. She channeled her grief and anger into defiance, often pushing boundaries and challenging authority figures. I, on the other hand, internalized my pain, choosing to retreat into the comforting embrace of solitude and silence. Our coping mechanisms diverged, and the gap between us grew wider. As we entered our teenage years, our paths seemed to diverge even further. Susan's rebellious streak intensified, leading to strained relationships with our grandparents. She started dyeing her hair vibrant shades, hanging out with what our grandparents deemed the wrong crowd, and engaging in minor delinquencies that left them exasperated. I, however, took the opposite route, seeking solace in academics and extracurricular activities. I aimed for excellence in everything I pursued, driven by the desire to make our parents proud, even if they could no longer witness my achievements. The strain between us peaked when Susan dropped out of high school, a decision that caused a rift between her and our grandparents. While she asserted her newfound independence, I continued to pursue my studies diligently, determined to secure a brighter future for myself. When Susan left home, the divide between us felt insurmountable. We became estranged, communicating only through sporadic and terse messages. Our family bonds weakened, and it seemed like Susan had embarked on a path of self-destruction while I sought stability and fulfillment. Part of me was wary, remembering the years of hurt she had caused, but another part saw the opportunity for healing and redemption. We met cautiously, and Susan poured out her remorse and regret. It was a heartfelt conversation, one that allowed us to bridge the chasm that had separated us for so long. I learned that Susan had faced her own share of struggles and hardships in the wake of our estrangement. She had hit rock bottom, but it had been the catalyst for her transformation. She had turned her life around, found stability, and wanted a chance to rebuild our sisterly bond. It wasn't an easy decision, but I chose to forgive her. I realized that holding on to anger and resentment wouldn't bring me peace. Instead, I embraced the opportunity to mend our relationship, and it was a choice that brought unexpected joy. So, friends, that's where we stand today. Lily's empire had crumbled, Daniel had faced his reckoning, and my sister and I had embarked on a journey of reconciliation. Revenge had led to redemption, and I had found strength in forgiveness. In the aftermath of the high school reunion and the chaos that ensued, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had led me here. My quest for revenge had uncovered secrets, shattered illusions, and exposed the true nature of those around me. But more importantly, it had transformed me. I had always been the quiet, reserved one, the peacemaker, if you will. But life had a way of teaching me that sometimes you need to fight for yourself, to stand up against those who seek to hurt you. My journey had been a crash course in resilience and self-discovery. Lily, once the queen bee of our high school, had lost her crown and found herself isolated. She faced the consequences of her actions and the judgment of those she had wronged. It was a humbling experience for her, and while I didn't revel in her suffering, I couldn't deny that a sense of justice had been served. As for Daniel, he had learned that taking shortcuts and betraying trust would only lead to his downfall. His reckless pursuit of his desires had cost him dearly, and he was left to rebuild his life from the ruins of his mistakes. My sister Susan's transformation was perhaps the most unexpected turn of events. Her journey from a troubled past to seeking redemption had touched my heart. We had rebuilt our sisterly bond, and while it wasn't without its challenges, forgiveness had allowed us to heal and move forward together. I also found solace in the friends I had reconnected with at the reunion. They had been my pillars of support during these tumultuous times, and I was grateful for their presence in my life. We shared laughter, tears, and stories of our shared past, reminding me that I was never truly alone. So, what did I learn from this whirlwind of events? Revenge may have been my initial motivation, but it had ultimately led me to a different destination, one of self-discovery and growth. I had rediscovered my strength and resilience, and I had learned the power of forgiveness and redemption. Life had a way of teaching us lessons, often in unexpected ways. It had shown me that we all make mistakes, but it's how we choose to respond and grow from them that defines us. Revenge may have been a fleeting desire, but redemption and forgiveness were the true keys to finding peace and happiness. As I stand here today, surrounded by the love of those who truly care about me, I can't help but feel grateful for this incredible journey. The scars of the past have healed, and I look forward to what the future holds. Thank you, friends, for joining me on this roller coaster of a story. It's been an honor sharing this tale with you. Remember, life's challenges may test us, but our choices and resilience can lead us to unexpected places. Embrace the journey, and may your path be one of redemption and happiness.